The warm spring afternoon at Cherry Blossom Park seemed perfect for 6-year-old Maya to make new friends. Her dark curls bounced as she climbed the playground equipment, her bright yellow dress catching the sunlight. She had just moved to the neighborhood with her adoptive mother, Dr. Chen, a renowned pediatric surgeon who had given her a loving home 2 years ago. Maya's infectious laughter drew other children to her as she organized a game of "The Floor is Lava," helping younger kids navigate between playground equipment. Her natural leadership abilities shone through as she made sure everyone felt included, just as her mother had taught her. However, the peaceful afternoon took an unexpected turn when Mrs. Thompson arrived with her daughter. The well-dressed woman in her designer outfit stood out among the casual park crowd. Her daughter hesitated, clearly wanting to join the fun game Maya had organized. "Come away from there," Mrs. Thompson called out sharply, pulling her daughter back. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Maya helping another child across the monkey bars. "We don't play with certain types of children," she said loudly enough for nearby parents to hear, causing several heads to turn. Maya's bright smile faltered for the first time that afternoon. She was young, but she understood the tone, the look, the way Mrs. Thompson's grip tightened on her daughter's hand. It wasn't the first time she had encountered such behavior, but it still stung. A few parents shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke up. The playground's happy chatter dimmed as the tension grew. Maya slowly climbed down from the equipment, her yellow dress no longer seeming quite so bright. Just then, a familiar voice cut through the awkward silence. "Is everything all right here?" Dr. Chen approached the playground, still wearing her hospital scrubs under her coat. She had managed to leave work early to surprise Maya. Mrs. Thompson's expression shifted from disdain to confusion as she watched Dr. Chen embrace Maya, who immediately brightened at her mother's presence. "Mommy! You came early!" Maya exclaimed, throwing her arms around her mother's neck. Dr. Chen's reputation preceded her in their community. As the head of pediatric surgery at the city's most prestigious children's hospital, she had been featured in local news several times for her groundbreaking procedures that had saved countless young lives. Mrs. Thompson's face reddened as she began to realize her mistake. Her daughter broke free from her grip and ran to join the game, which had cautiously resumed. The other parents, who had remained silent before, now warmly greeted Dr. Chen, many expressing their gratitude for her work at the hospital. "Your daughter is absolutely wonderful with the children," one parent commented. "She's been making sure everyone gets a turn and helping the younger ones. You must be so proud." Dr. Chen smiled, watching Maya return to her role as the game's cheerful leader. "I am. Every single day." Her voice carried clearly across the playground, where Mrs. Thompson stood frozen, her earlier prejudice exposed in the warm light of this mother's love for her child. The afternoon continued, but something had shifted. Parents who had been passive observers before now actively engaged, ensuring all children played together. Maya's game grew larger, with even more children joining in, including Mrs. Thompson's daughter, who had finally broken free from her mother's prejudiced constraints. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the playground, Maya's influence had transformed what could have been a day marred by prejudice into one of community and connection. Dr. Chen watched proudly as her daughter demonstrated the very values she had worked so hard to instill: kindness, inclusion, and the courage to rise above hatred with grace. The incident would have lasting ripples in their community, challenging preconceptions and proving that love knows no boundaries. Maya's afternoon at the park became more than just a playground encounter. It became a lesson in humanity that touched everyone present, including Mrs. Thompson, who stood alone at the edge of the playground, witnessing the beautiful chaos of children playing together, free from the prejudices adults too often imposed upon them. The following day at Cherry Blossom Park carried the weight of yesterday's events. Dr. Chen had spent the evening discussing the incident with Maya, making sure her daughter understood that some people's hearts needed time to grow, just like the flowers in their garden. Maya, with wisdom beyond her years, had simply hugged her mother and said, maybe they just need more love, Mommy. The park seemed different now. Word had spread through the neighborhood's parent groups about Mrs. Thompson's behavior, and about how Maya and Dr. Chen had handled it with grace. As Maya approached the playground, several parents greeted them warmly, some even apologizing for not speaking up the day before. Among the morning crowd was Mr. Rodriguez, a local elementary school teacher, who had witnessed everything. He approached Dr. Chen while Maya joined the other children. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "yesterday was a teaching moment for all of us. Your daughter showed more courage and kindness than most adults I know." Dr. Chen watched as Maya organized another game, this time, hospital, inspired by her mother's work. She had the children taking turns being doctors, nurses, and patients, making sure everyone got to play each role. "She teaches me more about love every day," Dr. Chen replied, her voice soft with pride. The morning took an unexpected turn when Mrs. Thompson arrived again, this time alone. She stood at the edge of the playground, clutching her designer handbag, her usual confidence notably absent. The other parents watched warily, some moving closer to their children. But Maya, spotting Mrs. Thompson, did something extraordinary. She walked right up to her and asked, "Would you like to be the patient in our hospital game? We're pretending to fix broken hearts today." The simple innocence of her invitation left Mrs. Thompson speechless. Dr. Chen held her breath, watching the interaction. She had always taught Maya that courage wasn't about being fearless, but about doing what's right even when scared. Now, her daughter was teaching that lesson to everyone present. Mrs. Thompson's carefully maintained composure cracked. I came to apologize," she said, her voice trembling. "My daughter came home yesterday and asked why she couldn't play with the kindest girl at the playground. She made me realize how wrong I was." The playground fell quiet, children pausing their game to watch. Mrs. Thompson continued, now addressing both Maya and Dr. Chen. "I grew up in a different time, with different beliefs. But that's no excuse. When I learned who you were, Dr. Chen, I felt ashamed. But I should have felt ashamed regardless of who you were." Dr. Chen stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. "Change begins with acknowledgement," she said quietly. "And it grows through action." Maya, still holding her toy stethoscope from the game, looked up at Mrs. Thompson. "In our hospital game, we say that everyone can help heal somebody else. Would you like to learn how to play?" Mrs. Thompson's eyes welled with tears. "I would like that very much," she whispered. What happened next transformed the playground into a scene of healing. Maya led Mrs. Thompson to the play area, explaining the rules of their hospital game. Other parents, seeing this transformation, began joining in. Soon, adults and children were playing together, pretending to heal not just pretend injuries, but real social wounds. Mr. Rodriguez pulled out his phone and started recording. "This," he said to another parent, "is how change happens. Not through grand gestures, but through small acts of kindness and acceptance." As the morning wore on, more families arrived, drawn by messages from friends about what was happening at the playground. Mrs. Thompson's daughter showed up with her father, her face lighting up at seeing her mother playing with Maya and the other children. Dr. Chen observed it all, remembering the day she had first met Maya at the hospital. A tiny patient with a heart condition, Maya had shown the same resilient spirit then, fighting through her recovery with unwavering optimism. That spirit had inspired Dr. Chen to not only treat Maya but to make her a permanent part of her life through adoption. Now, that same spirit was healing a different kind of heart condition, one that afflicted not the body, but society itself. The playground had become a microcosm of what their community could be, what it should be. Parents exchanged phone numbers, planning playdates and community events. Children played freely, unconcerned with differences that adults had taught them to see. As the morning came to a close, Mrs. Thompson approached Dr. Chen again. "Your daughter," she said, wiping her eyes, she's extraordinary. But then again, so is her mother. I have so much to learn, and even more to unlearn. The video Mr. Rodriguez had captured at the playground went viral on social media within days. Local news stations picked up the story, celebrating it as a powerful example of how children's innocence could bridge divides that adults had created. But for the families involved, the real impact was happening far from the cameras. Dr. Chen arrived home one evening to find Maya sitting at their kitchen table, carefully coloring what appeared to be an invitation. "What are you working on, sweetheart?" she asked, setting down her medical bag. "Mrs. Thompson helped me make invitations for my birthday party next week," Maya explained, her tongue sticking out slightly as she concentrated on her artwork. "She says everyone from the playground should come because birthdays are for bringing people together." Dr. Chen's heart swelled as she examined the invitation. The crayon-drawn picture showed children of different colors holding hands around a cake. Mrs. Thompson had helped with the writing, but the concept was purely Maya's vision. The following days brought unexpected changes to their community. The local community center, inspired by the playground story, launched a program called Play Together, Grow Together. Mrs. Thompson, determined to turn her moment of growth into meaningful action, volunteered to help organize it. One afternoon, as Dr. Chen was preparing for Maya's birthday party, she received a call from the hospital. A young patient needed emergency surgery, and she was the best person for the procedure. Her heart sank, she would miss setting up Maya's party. Before she could worry too much, her phone buzzed with messages. Mrs. Thompson and other playground parents had already organized everything. "We're your village now," one message read. "Go save lives, we've got this." At the community center, where the party would be held, parents worked together transforming the space. Mrs. Thompson had brought decorations from her party planning business, teaching other parents her techniques. Children ran around helping, their laughter echoing through the halls. Mr. Rodriguez set up a small stage area where his students would perform a play they had written about friendship and acceptance, inspired by Maya's playground hospital game. The story had touched so many lives that even the mayor had asked to attend the birthday celebration. When Maya arrived with her aunt, while Dr. Chen was in surgery, she stopped in the doorway, her eyes wide with wonder. The community center had been transformed into a magical space where paper lanterns cast warm light over tables decorated with flowers. Children from all over the neighborhood were already there, some she knew from the playground and others she'd never met before. Mrs. Thompson's daughter ran up to Maya, presenting her with a handmade bracelet. "Mom and I made friendship bracelets for everyone," she explained proudly. "Because now we're all connected." The party became more than just a birthday celebration. Parents who had never spoken to each other before found themselves sharing stories and exchanging phone numbers. Children who might never have met under normal circumstances played together as if they'd been friends forever. Dr. Chen arrived just as Maya was about to blow out her candles, still wearing her scrubs but beaming with pride. The crowd parted to let her through, many offering quiet thanks for various times she'd helped their children at the hospital. Before Maya could make her wish, Mrs. Thompson stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "I want to say something," she announced to the gathered families. "A few weeks ago, I was a different person. I had walls built so high around my heart that I couldn't see the beauty on the other side. But this little girl," she gestured to Maya, "and her amazing mother showed me that those walls only kept love out." The room fell silent as Mrs. Thompson continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Maya didn't just change my heart that day at the playground. She showed all of us what our community could be if we just let love lead the way. So today, we're not just celebrating her birthday. We're celebrating the rebirth of our community." Mr. Rodriguez's students then performed their play, which told the story of how a playground became a bridge between hearts. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as the children acted out scenes of friendship overcoming prejudice, their simple wisdom touching everyone present. The mayor, who had been quietly observing, stood up after the performance. "I came here today thinking I would give a speech about community," she said, "but instead, I learned more about leadership from a 6-year-old than I have in all my years in office. This is what our city should be, a place where every child feels safe to play, where every parent feels welcome, and where love knows no boundaries." As the party continued, Dr. Chen held Maya close, watching their community celebrate not just a birthday, but a transformation. The playground incident that could have deepened divides had instead become a catalyst for change, proving that sometimes the smallest hearts could teach the biggest lessons. The story of Maya's birthday party spread through the city like wildfire, but its true impact was felt in the quiet moments that followed. A week after the celebration, Dr. Chen noticed something remarkable during her rounds at the children's hospital. Parents in the waiting room, who would have previously sat in isolated silence, were now striking up conversations, sharing stories, and offering support to one another. One morning, while Dr. Chen was checking on a young patient, she overheard two mothers in the hallway. One was saying, "Did you hear about that playground story? My sister shared the video with me. It's happening right here in our city." The other mother replied, "My kids were at that birthday party. It changed how we see everything." Meanwhile, at Maya's school, changes were blooming like spring flowers. Mr. Rodriguez, who taught at the same school, had implemented what he called Friendship Friday. Every Friday, students would rotate lunch tables, ensuring no one sat with the same group twice in a month. The initiative was inspired by Maya's inclusive playground games. Mrs. Thompson had undergone perhaps the most remarkable transformation. She began volunteering at the children's hospital, using her party planning skills to organize celebration rooms for young patients finishing their treatments. She worked closely with Dr. Chen, turning sterile hospital spaces into magical environments where children could forget their illnesses for a moment. One day, as Mrs. Thompson was setting up a celebration room, she found Maya sitting in the hospital corridor, doing homework while waiting for her mother to finish surgery. "You know," Mrs. Thompson said, sitting beside her, "I never told you about my own mother." Maya looked up from her mathematics worksheet, curious. Mrs. Thompson continued, her voice soft with memory. "My mother was a lot like I was before I met you. She taught me to be afraid of people who were different. But she never had someone like you to show her a better way. Is that why you were scared at the playground?" Maya asked, with the direct innocence only a child could manage. Mrs. Thompson nodded, wiping away a tear. "Yes, but you taught me something important. You taught me that love doesn't care what people look like. Now I'm teaching my daughter the lesson I wish I'd learned when I was her age." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several families for the day's celebration. A young boy had just completed his final chemotherapy treatment, and Mrs. Thompson had transformed the room into an underwater wonderland, complete with blue streamers that looked like waves and origami fish swimming through the air. Maya jumped up to help, naturally taking charge of getting the other children involved in the celebration. She had become a regular presence at these hospital parties, bringing the same inclusive spirit she'd shown at the playground. The children's ward had become another place where barriers broke down, where parents forgot their differences in the shared experience of hoping for their children's health. Dr. Chen, finishing her surgery, arrived to find the celebration in full swing. She watched from the doorway as Maya led a group of children in a modified version of her playground hospital game, now adapted to help young patients feel less scared of their treatments. Mrs. Thompson stood nearby, helping a mother adjust her hijab while they chatted about their children's favorite books. The hospital administration had taken notice of these changes. They invited Dr. Chen to speak at their next board meeting about the importance of creating inclusive healing environments. But Dr. Chen knew the real expert was her daughter, who had an innate understanding of how to make everyone feel valued. That evening, as they drove home, Maya asked a question that stopped Dr. Chen in her tracks. "Mommy, do you think Mrs. Thompson's mom would have liked me if she met me now?" Dr. Chen pulled into their driveway and turned to face her daughter. "Sweetheart, anyone who truly gets to know you can't help but love you. You have a gift for helping people's hearts grow bigger." Mrs. Thompson's mother never had the chance to learn what her daughter did. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on their car window. It was their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patel, holding a basket of fresh samosas. "I saw you pulling in," she said when they stepped out. "My grandson told me about what happened at the playground. He was there that day, and now he wants to be a doctor like you, Dr. Chen. These are for Maya, for teaching our community what my generation should have learned long ago." As they shared the warm samosas in their kitchen, Dr. Chen noticed Maya drawing something. It was a picture of the playground, but different from how it actually looked. In Maya's drawing, the playground equipment was made of rainbow-colored bridges, with children of all colors crossing back and forth between them. "What's this, sweetheart?" Dr. Chen asked, studying the detailed drawing. "It's my dream playground," Maya explained, adding more colors to her bridges. "Mr. Rodriguez says bridges help people reach each other. So I thought, what if playgrounds were made of bridges? Then everyone would have to reach each other to play." Dr. Chen took a photo of the drawing and sent it to Mr. Rodriguez, who shared it with the school principal. Within hours, Maya's bridge playground concept had captured imaginations across the school district. The mayor's office reached out, interested in incorporating elements of Maya's design into a new community park project. The city council meeting room was packed to capacity the day Maya's bridge playground design was presented. The normally quiet chamber buzzed with excitement as families from all corners of the community filled the seats. Maya sat between Dr. Chen and Mrs. Thompson, clutching her original drawing, now laminated to preserve its vibrant colors. The mayor stood at the podium, gesturing to a large professional rendering based on Maya's concept. "What began as a child's dream has evolved into something our city desperately needs," she announced. "Our architectural team has transformed Maya's vision into a viable design that could revolutionize how we think about community spaces." The screen behind her displayed plans for a playground where every piece of equipment was connected by colorful bridges, creating an interconnected web of play spaces. The design included accessible ramps for children with disabilities, sensory-friendly quiet zones, and gathering areas where parents could interact while watching their children. Mrs. Thompson, who had joined the project committee, stood to address the council. Her voice, once used to exclude, now advocated for inclusion. "The estimated cost for this project is significant," she acknowledged, "but the cost of maintaining divided communities is far greater. I'm pledging half of my party planning business's profits for the next year to this project." Her announcement sparked a chain reaction. Local business owners in the audience began standing up, one after another, offering contributions. Mr. Rodriguez's school had already raised thousands through a student-led fundraising campaign. Even children approached the podium with piggy banks and lemonade stand earnings. Dr. Chen watched with tears in her eyes as Maya bounced excitedly in her seat, whispering, "Mommy, they're building bridges like in my picture." The simple wisdom of a child's drawing had captured something profound about human connection. The project gained unexpected momentum when a national news network picked up the story. They interviewed Maya at the original playground where everything had started. The young girl spoke with natural eloquence about her dream of a place where everyone could play together. "The bridges aren't just for walking," she explained to the reporter, pointing to her drawing. "They're for meeting new friends and learning about each other. Because when you're on a bridge, you're not on one side or the other, you're in the middle, together." The interview went viral, touching hearts across the country. Soon, city planners from other states were reaching out, interested in implementing similar designs in their communities. Maya's bridge playground concept was becoming a movement. Construction began 3 months later, funded by a combination of community donations, corporate sponsorships, and city grants. The old Cherry Blossom Park was transformed as Maya's vision took shape. Local artists painted the bridges with murals celebrating the community's diverse heritage, while engineers ensured every connection was safe and accessible. During construction, something remarkable happened at the temporary playground set up nearby. Parents who would have never crossed paths before were now meeting regularly, sharing construction updates and watching their children play together. The bridges were working their magic before they were even built. Mrs. Thompson's daughter, now one of Maya's closest friends, started a kids' construction committee. They met weekly to discuss their ideas for the playground, proving that children naturally understood the importance of including all voices in community projects. One day, while observing the construction, Dr. Chen found Maya sitting quietly on a bench, watching workers install one of the rainbow bridges. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" she asked. Maya looked up thoughtfully. "I was thinking about how Mrs. Thompson changed. It's like she crossed a bridge in her heart, right?" The profound simplicity of her observation left Dr. Chen momentarily speechless. The hospital where Dr. Chen worked took notice of the project's impact. They decided to renovate their pediatric ward's play area using similar principles of connection and inclusion. Mrs. Thompson volunteered to lead the design committee, working closely with child life specialists to ensure the space would serve all patients' needs. As the bridge playground neared completion, the community organized a series of cultural exchange events to celebrate. Families shared traditional foods, music, and stories, breaking down barriers through cultural understanding. Mr. Rodriguez's students performed plays about friendship in multiple languages, while local musicians collaborated on fusion performances. One evening, Mrs. Thompson hosted a community dinner in her backyard. As she watched Maya teaching other children games from different cultures she had learned, she turned to Dr. Chen. "You know, I used to think I was protecting my daughter by keeping her separate from others. Now I realize I was only building walls around her heart." Maya didn't just design a playground, she designed a new way of thinking about community. The dinner became a weekly tradition, rotating between different homes in the neighborhood. Each family would share their cultural traditions, creating a tapestry of understanding that went beyond mere tolerance. Children especially loved these gatherings, absorbing the richness of their diverse community without the prejudices that often came with age. As the playground's opening day approached, Maya added a final touch to her original drawing, a small heart at the center where all the bridges met. "Because that's where everyone comes together," she explained to anyone who asked. Her simple addition became the inspiration for a central meeting point in the playground, a heart-shaped plaza where families could gather for community events. Opening day dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself wanted to celebrate the completion of the bridge playground. The morning air buzzed with excitement as families began gathering hours before the official ceremony. Food trucks lined the streets, their owners having agreed to donate half their day's proceeds to the playground's maintenance fund. Dr. Chen helped Maya get ready for the big day, watching as her daughter carefully chose her clothes, a rainbow-colored dress that perfectly matched the playground's bridges. "You know what's special about today?" Maya asked as she tied her shoes. "It's exactly 3 months since Mrs. Thompson said sorry at the old playground." The significance of the timing wasn't lost on Dr. Chen. In just 3 months, their community had transformed from a place of division to one of unity, all because of a child's wisdom and an adult's courage to change. The ceremony was unlike any other the city had seen. Instead of traditional ribbon cutting, the organizing committee had arranged something special. Children from every neighborhood would simultaneously cross each bridge for the first time, meeting in the heart-shaped central plaza. Maya had come up with the idea, saying, "When everyone crosses together, no one has to cross alone." Mrs. Thompson, wearing a dress decorated with tiny bridges, custom-made for the occasion, coordinated the opening ceremony. She had spent weeks working with community leaders to ensure every detail celebrated inclusion. Local musicians played a melody combining different cultural traditions, while the air filled with the aroma of diverse cuisines from community food stands. As families arrived, they received small paper hearts to write messages of unity on. These would be preserved in a time capsule beneath the central plaza, to be opened in 20 years. So future kids can see how it all started, Maya had suggested during the planning. Mr. Rodriguez brought his entire class, each student carrying a handmade flag representing their heritage. They had spent weeks researching their backgrounds, learning about each other's cultures, and creating art that celebrated their differences and similarities. Just before the ceremony began, something unexpected happened. A group of teenagers from the local high school approached the stage. They had been inspired by Maya's story and had written a song about breaking down barriers. With guitars, drums, and voices representing different musical traditions, they performed their piece, Bridges of the Heart. The crowd grew quiet as Maya took the microphone, her small voice carrying across the gathering. 3 months ago, I was scared at a playground, she began, looking at Mrs. Thompson with a smile. But being scared helped us build something better. Now no one has to be scared to play together. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Maya taught me that the scariest bridges are the ones we build in our minds, she said. But they're also the most important ones to cross. At exactly noon, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. Children positioned themselves at each bridge entrance, holding hands with new friends they'd made during the playground's construction. Dr. Chen watched from the central plaza as Maya stood ready at her bridge, holding hands with Mrs. Thompson's daughter on one side and a child from the hospital where she volunteered on the other. A drum roll built up the excitement, and at the signal, children began crossing all the bridges simultaneously. The sight was breathtaking, dozens of children, representing every corner of the community, moving together toward the heart of the playground. Parents wiped away tears as they watched barriers dissolving with each step their children took. As the children reached the central plaza, they formed a circle, joining hands. The teenagers' band began playing their song again, and soon everyone was singing along to the chorus, building bridges, heart by heart, where endings are just another start. The rest of the day became a celebration of everything the community had achieved. Children who would have never met before played together on the interconnected equipment. Parents who might have avoided each other 3 months ago shared food and stories. The bridges, both physical and metaphorical, were doing exactly what Maya had envisioned. Local news crews captured the moment when a group of children organized an impromptu world parade on the bridges, each child teaching others a traditional dance or game from their culture. The playground had become more than just a place to play, it was a living classroom of cultural exchange. As the sun began to set, casting warm golden light across the colorful bridges, Dr. Chen found Maya sitting with Mrs. Thompson in the quiet reading nook built into one of the playground's quieter corners. They were looking through a scrapbook of the playground's journey, from Maya's first crayon drawing to today's celebration. You know what the best part is? Maya was saying to Mrs. Thompson. Now other cities want to build bridge playgrounds too. That means more kids won't have to feel scared like I did. Mrs. Thompson hugged Maya close. And more adults won't have to stay scared like I was, she added softly. You didn't just design a playground, sweetheart. You designed a way to heal hearts. The day's festivities concluded with a lantern release. Each family lit a biodegradable lantern and wrote a hope for the community's future on it. As the lanterns rose into the darkening sky, they formed a constellation of dreams, each light representing a commitment to maintaining the bridges they'd built, not just the physical ones in the playground, but the ones between hearts and minds. 1 year after the bridge playground's opening, the transformation in the community had exceeded everyone's expectations. The playground had become more than just a place for children to play, it had become the heart of a movement that was spreading across the country. On a warm Sunday afternoon, Dr. Chen sat on one of the parent benches, watching Maya lead a new group of children in a game she'd invented called Cultural Treasure Hunt. The game involved solving riddles about different traditions and histories, with each correct answer leading players to another bridge in the playground. You won't believe what happened at the hospital yesterday, Mrs. Thompson said, joining Dr. Chen on the bench. She had recently been appointed the director of the hospital's new community bridge program, which used Maya's bridge concept to help families of young patients connect and support each other during difficult times. A mother from another city came in with her sick child, Mrs. Thompson continued, her eyes bright with emotion. She told me she'd seen the video of our playground story when it went viral last year. It inspired her to start a similar program in her hometown. Now there are bridge playgrounds being built in 5 different states. The impact of Maya's idea had rippled far beyond their community. Schools across the country had adopted Mr. Rodriguez's Friendship Friday program. The teenagers' song, Bridges of the Heart, had become an unofficial anthem for inclusion initiatives nationwide. Even corporate offices were implementing bridge-building programs inspired by the playground success. Maya's original crayon drawing now hung in the City Hall, protected in a special display case. Below it, a plaque read, "Sometimes the smallest hands build the strongest bridges." The image had become a symbol of hope and change, reproduced on everything from T-shirts to murals across the city. The weekly community dinners had grown into a massive food festival called Tastes of Unity, where families shared not just meals but stories, traditions, and friendship. Today's gathering was special. They were celebrating the groundbreaking of the city's second bridge playground on the other side of town. As families began arriving for the celebration, Dr. Chen noticed something remarkable. The nervous glances and hesitant interactions that had once characterized their community gatherings were gone. In their place was a warm familiarity, the kind that comes from truly knowing and appreciating one another. A group of children rushed past, laughing as they played their own version of Maya's hospital game. Among them was Mrs. Thompson's daughter, who had recently announced she wanted to become a doctor like Dr. Chen. Because doctors build bridges too, she had explained, bridges between sickness and health. The mayor arrived with exciting news. The bridge playground concept had been nominated for a National Community Development Award. But more importantly, a major children's television network wanted to create a show based on the playground story, focusing on teaching young viewers about inclusion and community building. Maya, now 7, took the news with her characteristic wisdom. "Can we make sure the show has real kids telling their own stories?" she asked. "Because everyone's story is important." The television producers, moved by her suggestion, immediately agreed to incorporate real community stories into the program. The celebration took an unexpected turn when a surprise guest arrived, the governor, who had made the journey specifically to see the playground that was making headlines across the state. As she toured the grounds, Maya explained each bridge's significance, from the friendship flight, swing sets that required cooperation to work, to the Unity Towers, where children from different backgrounds worked together to solve puzzles. "You know what's most beautiful about this place?" the governor commented to Dr. Chen. "It's not just the children who are changing. Look around, the adults are learning just as much, if not more." She was right. Parents who would have never interacted before were now organizing community events together. The playground had become a place where prejudices dissolved in the face of shared experiences and genuine connections. Mrs. Thompson stood to share her story with the gathering crowd. "A year ago, I was a different person," she began, her voice strong with conviction. "I thought I was protecting my daughter by teaching her to fear differences. Instead, I was building walls around her heart. But a little girl with more wisdom than I had showed me that the only thing we should fear is the loss of our humanity when we fail to see the beauty in our differences." The afternoon's festivities included a special ceremony where children added their own touches to the playground, handprints in rainbow colors along the bridges, representing their commitment to maintaining the connections they'd built. Each child also received a small bridge-shaped pendant, a reminder that they were all bridge builders in their own way. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the playground, Maya tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, remember when you said sometimes hard things help us grow? Like when I was sick in the hospital?" Dr. Chen nodded, pulling her daughter close. "I do, sweetheart." "Well," Maya continued, watching the children playing on the bridges she had imagined, I think that day at the old playground was like that. It was hard, but it helped our whole community grow. And now we're like a big garden of hearts, all growing together." The metaphor struck Dr. Chen deeply. From the seeds of a painful moment, they had grown something beautiful, not just a playground, but a new way of seeing each other and building community. As families began gathering for the evening's potluck dinner, the teenage band that had performed at the opening ceremony returned to play their song. This time, they had added verses in different languages, each telling part of their community's transformation story. The night ended with a new tradition, the Bridge Builders Pledge, written by the children themselves. Standing in a circle in the heart-shaped plaza, hands joined, they recited, "We promise to be bridges, not walls. To help others cross when they're scared. To learn from differences, to grow through challenges, and to remember that love builds the strongest bridges of all." As Dr. Chen and Maya walked home under the stars, they passed the old playground where their story had begun. It stood as a reminder of how far they'd come, and how a moment of prejudice had been transformed into a movement of love and understanding that would continue to grow, bridge by bridge, heart by heart, community by community.